Hey everyone, it's your girl Abby Sharp from Abby's Kitchen. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for the overwhelming support that you guys showed me after my pregnancy announcement. I don't know why I was nervous to talk about this. I was also really excited, but I just think in light of everything that I went through and all the challenges that I faced, your support means so much to me. And I'm so excited to really bring you along on this journey with me through this pregnancy. But a lot of you had actually asked me about my protocol and everything that I did to get pregnant and to stay pregnant. Now, huge disclosure before we get into this. This video is definitely for education and really entertainment purposes only. I am not recommending that anybody do this protocol at all. Obviously, anyone's infertility protocol would be highly dependent on their blood work and their diagnosis. And in fact, taking one or more of these supplements could potentially, depending on your case, actually reduce your chances of getting pregnant. So please always be working with your doctors and fertility team to find the best protocol for you. Okay, so quick little fertility recap. This was not natural conception. This baby was conceived via IVF or in vitro fertilization. And the reason for that is because I have PCOS and I don't ovulate. And one of the major issues I was having with my previous embryo transfers and pregnancy losses was that I had thin uterine lining. And we don't know exactly why that happened, but it is speculated that this may have been caused by me being on the pill for so long. But that is a whole other video. So if you're interested in that, leave me a comment below and maybe I will dive more into that later. But basically the uterine lining is really important. That's what you shed when you have a period every single month. And the uterine lining needs to get nice and thick and fluffy for the embryo to implant into it and stick to it so that you can have a viable pregnancy. And in IVF, most doctors won't even transfer an embryo unless you have at least 8 millimeters thickness in your uterine lining. And that's just going to help ensure the best chances of actually conceiving. So let's first talk about what I did before my embryo transfer to help prepare myself for pregnancy. First of all, pre-transfer, let's talk supplements. Number one, of course, prenatal. And I started taking, I was always really taking prenatal. I don't think I even stopped because I went from basically breastfeeding to then immediately trying to get pregnant. And even when you're breastfeeding, you should be continuing with your prenatal supplement. And I think I've mentioned this in another video, but I know my nutrition professors always used to say, if you are sexually active and you are of childbearing age, you should be on a prenatal vitamin just because to safeguard against whoopsies and accidentally getting pregnant. And we know how important that is for both for mom, but also for baby for protecting against neural tube defects. And I do often recommend that when possible, you choose a prenatal vitamin that has methylfolate instead of just folic acid. And the reason for that, most supplements have folic acid because it's a more stable form, but then our body has to convert that folic acid into the active methylfolate. And it's estimated that up to 60% of women actually have a gene variant that hinders this conversion. And I don't know for sure if I have this gene variant. Most people don't know. However, this gene variant is linked with PCOS and miscarriage loss. And for that reason, I just felt like it was safer to make sure that I was getting that methylfolate in my supplement. Okay, so next was NAC or N-acetylcysteine. There is some evidence to suggest that NAC use is helpful for recurrent miscarriage and pregnancy loss, so this was a must for me. I also was taking L-arginine, a pretty high dose actually, because that's what's being used in the literature. But L-arginine is an amino acid that operates in the nitrous oxide pathway to kind of promote blood vessel dilation and improve blood flow. So this was really for my thin uterine lining. And there is some evidence to suggest that L-arginine is helpful for those who are poor responders in IVF, particularly those with the thin uterine lining, like me. Next was vitamin E. This one was really important because there is evidence to suggest that vitamin E supplementation could increase the endometrial thickness in half of the women who were taking it, which is pretty good outcomes. Also vitamin D. I mean, I think most people, especially here in Canada, can benefit from a vitamin D supplement. So this is something I take all year round. But for infertility particularly, it is really great because there is evidence to suggest that it may benefit some of the metabolic parameters in PCOS. And there is also evidence to suggest that having optimal blood levels may help increase IVF success rates and pregnancy rates in general. So I don't know, vitamin D really is such an important vitamin that we really should not be overlooking. Okay, I'm almost done. Then we have omega-3s. Again, this is something I take all year round. I think most people can benefit from taking an omega-3 supplement, especially if you don't eat a ton of fatty fish. But there's also some research to suggest that supplementing with omega-3 supplements may increase the likelihood of a successful pregnancy in women undergoing IVF. So that was great. Also melatonin, low dose melatonin. I mean, obviously I was loving that I had an excuse to take this because I wasn't sleeping well, so that was helping me. But also there is some evidence that it helps with fertility as well, particularly that it can improve the implantation rates for women who are struggling with PCOS. So that was another reason for me to take the melatonin. And then finally was my magnesium calm supplement, which is like a little powder you put in some water, and I would just take a shot of it before bed basically. And this was just for sleep, not necessarily a fertility supplement per se. However, I do strongly believe that getting better sleep was really integral to the success of this transfer cycle. And I just know that, you know, all of the cycles that didn't work or ended up being pregnancy losses, those were the cycles where I was in like the pits of my deep, dark insomnia. So, I mean, it's totally anecdotal, but that was my experience and I just knew I had to get my sleep under control. But basically, magnesium activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps to kind of make you feel calm and relaxed. It also binds GABA receptors, which helps to quiet down some nerve activity. So it does help to kind of made me feel a little bit more calm and relaxed right before bed, and I still do take it. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the lifestyle things that I was doing, starting with acupuncture. So like I said, my main issue is that I have thin uterine lining, and there is some evidence to suggest that, what are you doing, Poppy? There is some evidence to suggest that acupuncture may help with pregnancy rates, embryo transfer rates, and help with the uterine lining. But for me, more than anything, I just felt like it was almost like forced meditation because you're kind of stuck there hostage like for at least a half an hour while there's things in, you know, your hands. So you can't even like go on your phone, right? We're so used to just always be like, okay, if I'm just having to do nothing, then I'll just like scroll through my phone. You couldn't even do that. So I really had to relax, and it forced me to relax in an otherwise stressful process. Okay, next was my sleep and stress management strategies. So my doctor just kept telling me over and over again, because obviously I was so stressed. She kept saying, Abby, you know, stress does not impact your outcomes here, your chances of getting pregnant, probably telling me that as a way to make me feel less stressed. But I still inherently just knew instinctually that my stress and my lack of sleep was obviously not helping the cause. So I really made an extra effort, especially this last transfer round, to get my stress and sleep under control. And I obviously made a whole video about some of these strategies that helped my insomnia, so you can check that out right here. But some of the things I was doing included taking on, you know, not working or really even doing any screen time before bed, taking on fewer projects, taking more downtime, and also ultimately doing a lot of therapy. And then finally, gentle exercise. So for this cycle, I really did try to tone down my exercise regime. I stopped any cardio. I dropped my weights down that I was using. So let's say I was bench pressing like 25 pounds. I took it down to like 15, which was really hard for me at first because I was like, this is so easy and boring and I'm not like getting anything out of this. But it was still really nice to move my body. Now I'm probably doing like 20 pounds months and I'll stay here for the rest of my pregnancy, not expecting or wanting to like get stronger or anything like that. And then I'll pick it up when I feel ready postpartum. But I really didn't want to get my heart rate up too high. And I also did not want to spike my cortisol, as high cortisol has been associated with infertility. So there's that too. Okay, so let's talk about diet here. Now, there are a bunch of like Chinese medicine recommendations for fertility, especially with like thin uterine lining. So people are recommending me to eat lots of red foods because it helps with blood flow. But honestly, I didn't find any research to back any of these things up. So I didn't want to stress myself out unnecessarily by like thinking, oh, I can only eat red foods. So the only thing I really did concentrate on for the most part was no caffeine. I didn't even have chocolate. I also cut out alcohol actually for this last cycle, but not even any chocolate, like maybe a bite here or there, but really not much more than that. And a lot of women out there can have chocolate, I mean, not just chocolate, but any caffeine without any issues in early pregnancy. But there is evidence to suggest that having more than 200 milligrams is associated with double the miscarriage risk. And for someone who is already clearly prone to that, I was not willing to take that risk. Also, one of the drugs I'm on, prednisone, causes anxiety and insomnia, and I really did not want to perpetuate those side effects. The other thing that I guess I really was concentrating on was just eating enough food, because again, I didn't want to spike my cortisol, and underfueling is something that is linked to higher levels of cortisol. So for me, I was just really focusing on lots of healthy snacks, lots of healthy fats at all of my meals, and just lots of nourishing comfort foods. Okay, so now let's get into the hard stuff, my drugs. Okay, so first of all is the estrogen patches and injections. So most people will have to do either patches or estrogen suppositories, vaginal suppositories, as a way to help thicken the uterine lining. And because my uterine lining was so temperamental, I also had to do injections this transfer round, which I had never done before. I'd always just done either patches or suppositories, and clearly it really didn't do that much. So we added in those injections, and that seemed to help. Progesterone is another thing that really is a non-negotiable for IVF. So you do suppositories, so I did those 3 times a day, and then injections every other day. And the injections are in the old bum. Thank you to my nurse husband for doing that every morning for me. But basically you start the progesterone once your lining reaches the desired thickness. And it really just helps to kind of like stabilize the lining and prevent pregnancy loss. So in fact, some women, even if they're not undergoing IVF, will take progesterone in the first trimester just as a way to kind of stabilize things and keep things nice and steady and good. Okay, next was vaginal Viagra. Yes, you heard me right. I remember when I went to the pharmacy one time to pick this up, and the pharmacist was like, sorry ma'am, I hate to do this, but like, can you tell me what this is for exactly? I've never seen instructions to give Viagra vaginally as a suppository. And of course I explained it to him, but basically, Viagra increases blood flow to the nether regions. And since a uterine lining requires good blood flow, the theory is that the Viagra's, if given vaginally as a suppository, is going to help with that blood flow and thicken the uterine lining. And actually, there is some pretty good evidence that it does work for some women. Now, I will say that my cycle before this one, which was like super long and drawn out, it used vaginal Viagra, and it did not work for me, but who knows what exactly went wrong. But one thing I figured out in retrospect was that with the failed cycle, I just went to the regular pharmacy and got the prescription filled there, and they gave me just the regular stereotypical blue pills that men usually take. And I just feel like they were never actually dissolving and absorbing properly. This is gonna be total TMI, but basically every single time I would insert one of these blue pills vaginally, I would like feel up there a bunch of undissolved pills. And I was like, am I spending like $100 a day on this drug and it's not even absorbing or dissolving? Then with this cycle that actually did work, I went to the compounding pharmacy and they had actually compounded me proper vaginal suppositories that were like clear and they dissolved and it was like super easy. And I mean, that one ended up working. So I don't know, just a little pro tip if you get prescribed vaginal Viagra for infertility or thin uterine lining, I don't know, maybe try to go to a compounding pharmacy to get an actual suppository. Okay, next was low dose aspirin. So aspirin is a vasodilator. So it increases blood flow to the uterus, which in turn can help thicken the uterine lining. And there is research to suggest that adding low dose aspirin to your protocol may help to thicken the lining and also increase pregnancy rates. So that was something that we had in my protocol pretty much from the beginning once we realized that the lining was an issue. And then finally, I took the antihistamine CPP protocol. So this protocol requires you to take 10 milligrams of prednisone, 10 milligrams of Claritin, and 20 milligrams of Pepcid every single day. And the theory is that one of the reasons why we see recurrent miscarriage is that the uterus's natural killer cells attack the foreign fetus. And so these drugs actually downregulate the immune system in the hopes that the fetus will be spared. Now, there is some medium quality evidence to suggest that this protocol does work. And a lot of fertility clinics do say anecdotally that it works for a lot of women. So that's why we decided to give it a go. However, I will say it's not easy. It was my least favorite drug to have to take. Prednisone is evil. And I mean, 10 milligrams is not even a super high dose. So I can't even imagine having to take a clinical like IBD type of dose, like 50 or 60 milligrams, because 10 milligrams alone made me feel super loopy and bloated and just kind of crazy, also super anxious. So hated that. But again, kitchen sink approach. I was willing to do anything. Okay, so finally, let's talk about the procedures that helped me get pregnant. So first of all, obviously IVF. We did IVF with ICSI and PGS testing for this round. And ICSI is basically where, unlike natural fertilization, which occurs when you have the petri dish with the egg and you add some sperm in there and the sperm fight it out to get to the egg and fertilize the egg. ICSI is where they find the best sperm. They put them in a, I've decided it's a boy, put the sperm into a needle of sorts or a syringe, and they insert it into the egg, and it kind of like forces it to fertilize. So we did ICSI, and then we did what we call PGS testing. So it's a genetic screening where they biopsy a little bit of the tissue of the fertilized embryo after it's, well, unfortunately we froze our eggs, had to thaw them, and then they biopsied them, and then they froze them again. So basically that will help to rule out any of the embryos that are just not genetically competent and are therefore more likely to result in a miscarriage or a chemical pregnancy. So we did that. Next was my intralipid infusions, which I did once before my transfer and then once after a positive pregnancy test. So in this procedure, basically I was hooked up in an IV in my arm for 3 hours as they slowly pumped what was basically mayonnaise into my vein. But seriously, like the ingredients in the bag were soy oil, egg yolks, glycerin, and water. So basically mayo, and definitely not vegan. But basically this procedure is also based on the theory of the natural killer cells attacking the fetus. And the thought is that these fatty acids help to kind of stave off the natural killer cells and spare the fetus, essentially. There aren't any really big randomized control trials that have looked into using intralipid infusions. However, some early trials have been really promising. But what we know is that not every woman is going to benefit from intralipid infusions. Those that are most likely to benefit are those with autoimmune diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, endometriosis, and those like me with recurrent miscarriage. And finally was the uterine dilation. Now, this, my friends, was the magic procedure that we all believe was what got me pregnant. This is what made all of the difference. So I remember my doctor sitting me down and being like, Abby, are you ready to go into like uncharted like non-evidence-based territory with me. And I was like, yes, I am desperate. Take me there. I will do anything at this point. And he explained to me that in his clinical experience, a lot of women who've been on the pill for a very long period of time or have breastfed for a long period of time, their estrogen levels are so suppressed that their uterus kind of like hardens up and shrivels up. I mean, I'm sure that's not the actual technical process of what actually is going on, but that was how he's trying to explain it to me in like layperson's terms, basically. And so he likened it to having like a thin eggshell coating around the uterus that made it very difficult, if not impossible, for any estrogen, including the kind of synthetic estrogen that they were giving me as drugs, to penetrate the uterus to thicken the uterine lining. So he was thinking about this experience as, you know, those days where you have a muscle knot and you go in there for a deep tissue massage and they're really massaging in there to try to get the blood flow back to the muscle. And he thought, what if I could massage the uterus to help stimulate blood flow and therefore thicken the uterine lining? Well, he obviously wasn't going to stick his whole hand in me and manually massage my uterus. So what he did instead, or his theory was, I can put a balloon up into your uterus and pump the balloon up and essentially break that shell. And then of course you'd go on to have a normal typical transfer cycle taking estrogen to thicken the lining. But without any research having been done on this procedure, of course, this is just something he made up. He had done this on 8 other women, all of which had very similar stories that I had. So thin uterine lining, recurrent miscarriages, and it worked on 7 out of 8 of those women. So I didn't even have to think about it. I was like, yes, sign me up. I will absolutely be in for this. And guess what? Spoiler alert, folks, it worked. Like, it actually fucking worked. My lining, which in any other scenario would never get past 6 millimeters, actually got to 8 millimeters without any kind of extended drug protocol. And that was the cycle that got me pregnant and kept me pregnant. It literally felt like a miracle. I'm still in absolute awe. And he's since told me he's going to work on publishing these findings so that people around the world in fertility clinics can start to utilize this so incredible, miraculous procedure. Now, how was the uterine dilation in general? Well, the worst part for me was that I had to take antibiotics for 2 weeks before the procedure, just as a safeguard in case against infection. And that was pretty horrible because they made me really, really sick. But the procedure itself, they actually put me completely out for because I assume it would have been really painful otherwise. So I didn't feel a thing. And afterwards, I think I just felt some like mild cramping and like mild discomfort. So really wasn't bad. It also only cost me $500, which I know for some of you might be thinking, well, that is $500 too much. But in the grand scheme of IVF, it's like, I don't know, a few days worth of medication. So it was absolutely worth taking the jump. Okay, so that was before transfer. And then what did I do after transfer? So after the embryo transfer, I had to eliminate a lot of the supplements that, it's not that they're not necessarily safe, it's just that we don't have any evidence to prove that they're safe. So obviously it's just not ethical to test a lot of these things in pregnancy. So at that point, I was down to just taking my prenatal supplement, NAC, which I reduced to 500 milligrams a day, vitamin D, omega-3, and my magnesium. Okay, so my drug protocol after transfer and after, in those early days of pregnancy were continuing my progesterone and estrogen injections until I was 8 weeks pregnant. I continued taking the progesterone suppositories and estrogen patches until I was 10 weeks pregnant, and then they slowly weaned me down. Continued to the low dose aspirin until I was 7 weeks. Now, normally they would have continued this longer, but I ended up having a subchorionic hematoma. So they just wanted to get me off any blood thinners just to reduce the risk of bleeding. I also got to reduce my prednisone dose in half to 5 milligrams as soon as I got a positive pregnancy test, which was so exciting because that was the worst drug of all of them. And then I got to come off it completely by 8 weeks. So hallelujah. And then continued my Pepcid until 12 weeks pregnant and Claritin also till 12 weeks pregnant. And then I was on my own, baby. Yeah, just my body was doing its own thing, and that felt so freeing. Finally, how did my lifestyle and diet change? Well, not a whole lot. I would say that, this time I really had to focus on the stress and the sleep and really continuing on with all the work that I'd done there. So I did lots of meditations every single day, continued to avoid any heavy lifting and any kind of heavy exercise, just doing gentle exercise, walking, things like that. Went to therapy every single week and really tried to make that a priority. I also continued with acupuncture once a week, even though the points that we were using obviously changed a little bit since, before transfer and after transfer while pregnant. And then finally, I really tried to just focus when it comes to food and diet on eating whatever I could really tolerate, because I had really, really bad morning / all day sickness, basically all first trimester. So I had to just really tune in and listen to my body and figure out what I could eat, what made me feel good, what did not. When I felt full. So I had to go really, really slow. So bottom line here, folks, if you're still with me, is that I know if you're watching this and maybe if you haven't struggled with infertility in the past, you might be thinking like, what the hell? I thought that you just have to have unprotected sex and like forget your pills for a few days and suddenly you'll get pregnant. I mean, I wish it was that easy for me. Nothing in motherhood has been easy for me, especially including getting to motherhood. But I also want to acknowledge that my road has not been the hardest of all. That's for sure. I have so many blessings that I'm grateful for, like a supportive partner, and that I have access and can afford infertility treatments, and that I'm relatively young and I'm healthy, and that I have a child that I love. And if God forbid this didn't work out for me, I would have to, and I would find joy and happiness in what I have. It is enough. I'm so grateful for that. I know so many women and couples out there who have been at this for so long and struggling so many years. They've mortgaged their homes and they've gotten divorced out of stress and they still don't have a child. So yeah, I know that I'm a lucky one. But my purpose with this video is not to, gain and garner any kind of sympathy, but rather to open up a conversation with parents and intended parents, because nobody ever talks about infertility and it makes it so much harder. It makes us feel so much more isolated and alone. So if you are struggling, please reach out. I am here, whether you want to email me or DM me or leave me a comment below. I will be your sounding board. I'm here to listen. I'm here to offer solicited advice if that's what you're looking for. I'm just here to, be a supportive ear. Infertility sucks and parenthood is really, really hard. So let's be a better village together. Well, folks, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I mean, it was a lot to get through, and I realized that for those of you who hopefully don't have to think about infertility, that was like a lot of information. Maybe it was educational, maybe it was informational, and maybe it was interesting. I don't know, but leave me a comment below. I want to hear from you about what you think about it. If you have any other questions, I'm going to be doing a Q&A about my pregnancy and about infertility and IVF and all that stuff. Any questions that you have, leave me a comment below and I will get to them in my upcoming Q&A video. Okay, folks, well, in that note, please be sure to give this a thumbs up, leave me a comment, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time on Abby's Kitchen. Bye.